Welkom terug by die groot ontbyt. Die Erfenis-kenner Chris Murphy gesels vanmôre met ons. Ons praat spesifiek oor erfenisroetes, erfenis-areas en interessante plekke aan die Wes-Kus wat jy dalk kan besoek as jy daar is. Wel, as jy daar bly of daar gaan vakansie hou hierdie Desember. Goeiemôre Chris.
Good morning.
It's nice having you with us this morning. Let's talk about the Wes-Kus. Why is it important? Let's talk about the heritage routes and the heritage sites and the plaza and the buildings. Why is it important to protect the heritage of the Wes-Kus? Die wind waai daar so verskriklik hard, man. Die goed gaan uit mekaar uitwaai.
Well, they say if you don't learn from the past, we can't go forward and actually learn and produce anything different. And it also has the added benefit of tourism in our region. We are, in that respect, quite underdeveloped. So there's a lot of prospects for people to develop their sites, their old historic farms, the centers of the towns and villages of this part of the world.
That's also the magic of the Wes-Kus, if you think about it. The fact that it isn't overdeveloped. Okay, maybe places like Paternoster exploding in the last couple of years from the little town it was, say, 15, 20 years ago. But it's rather not underdeveloped, but it's developing slower, and that is the magic of the Wes-Kus.
But, excuse me, you talk about development, but of course it's relative. You talk about Paternoster exploding. There's a town that I would deal with a great deal, Erfenis-Castile, has grown dramatically over the past couple of decades.
Yes.
But then compared to the big international cities like Barcelona or Venice, where people are protesting against the level of tourism. So there's a balance that needs to be achieved. And I think that's where heritage is very good, because it's not everybody's cup of tea. I appreciate that. But it attracts a large number of people that actually do enjoy the heritage of this part of the world.
There's obviously the natural heritage of the area as well. There's a very specific natural heritage quality or a character to the area. We're talking about the Wes-Kus National Park, which is one of the most beautiful places that I've ever visited around the Langebaan Lagoon. How many heritage places or sites, specifically natural heritage sites, are there on the West Coast?
Well, that's certainly one, and there's north of Veldrift, there's around the Wes-Kus area, there's a nature reserve also managed by Cape Nature. But you mentioned the Wes-Kus National Park, and that's specifically interesting because it does have heritage sites within it. If you see, there's an old VOC fort that's there, for example, the farm, the restaurant now, Gielbeck, that's also a very old historic farm. So it's a complement between, especially with the flower season, September, October, to have the balance of nature and heritage in one place.
Chris, if I'm someone that likes to be indoors slightly more and I like visiting museums, are there any museums that I can go visit in these areas?
Now you've hit my spot. I actually represent the Riebeek Valley Museum, and we are part of a group called the West Coast Museum Forum. And these museums vary so dramatically in scale. Our smallest museum is actually on a farm outside Mariesburg, the Willem Loek Museum. It's actually a private museum. You have to book to go there. It's all the family heritage, the farming implements, personal implements. And then it goes completely to the opposite end of the scale to something like the West Coast Fossil Park, which received a very large grant from Lotto to establish themselves. They not only do they actually display fossils that are 5 million years old, but they do actually walking tours there as well. They've got a restaurant. So it's actually a much different facility from a little farm. And then, of course, there's Kwatu on the West Coast near Azefontein, and they highlight the Sun culture. And they employ Sun people who tell you their cultural heritage stories. But again, it has a restaurant. And just up from a location point of view, it's up on a kopje with views right across Table Bay to Table Mountain. So it's pretty stunning.
There are so many beautiful historical buildings on the Wes-Kus, in these museums as well. Where would people go to find out more information about the nice places to see? Because all of us have Googled as much as we can when you're on the holiday in the Wes-Kus, and you've found one or two things, but there are obviously lots of hidden gems.
Okay. A good place to start is Malmesbury at the Tourism Office, because they are the first of the major towns you hit coming up into the Wes-Kus. And there you can pick up leaflets dealing with the West Coast Museum Forum. Also, they have a fantastic heritage route within their town that describes all the old buildings for you to walk around to look at. A few of the other towns, too, also have heritage routes like Erfenis-Castile and Riebeek Valley, also Piketberg. So there are choices that you can find through those tourism offices. Tourism for us is the great working partner in heritage in this part of the world.
Chris, I'm sure this might be difficult for you, but if I'm a tourist and I have time to go visit either one museum or take one route, what is that one thing in the West Coast that you would actually recommend going, okay, Jennifer, you know what, if you have time, if you have one day to do something, this is what I would recommend?
Oh, that's a question I'm going to get into trouble answering this, aren't I? But as I say, I'm part of the Riebeek Valley Museum, and that's a very interesting situation. It tells the story. I'm a great believer in telling the whole story from the beginning. By that I mean going back to the paleontological times, the early people that lived in the valley, as well as the settlers that came in. Mm-hmm. And then Riebeek Valley has got a very unusual aspect, is that they have two towns that are only 4 kilometers apart. If you look at the rest of the landscape, they're much further apart. They were usually a wagon journey was most of the way that they determined those distances. But the reason for that is that in the 19th century, the community tried to establish a church in the valley, but a community nearby contested that. And in the end, the Moedergemeente actually gave permission for 2 churches, which are only 4 kilometers apart and completed 2 years apart. So there's a great deal to see in the 2 villages. They're quite diverse in their styles. And also, there's a very big tourist attraction. There are many, many restaurants to eat out. Accommodation is freely available there. So, unfortunately, I'm a bit biased with that. I'm going to be in trouble for that.
Well, I tend to agree with you. Riebeek Valley is truly magical. And I've been there 3 weeks ago. Again, it's a lovely, lovely place. But there are also other magical places on the Western Coast, which is not close to the coast, but a little more inland. For instance, the Cederberg, Wuppertal area. It's a lovely place.
Well, Wuppertal is important. We have something called a mission route in this part of the world, starting down in the south near Darling at Malmbury, which was a VOC outpost, the cattle station in the beginning. And then you can go up through into the Pikkeberg Mountains to Goedverwacht and Wittewater. Again, have interesting stories. And then ultimately, Wuppertal, you talk about and what we call the Achtercederberg. Wuppertal, as you probably know, a few years ago, had a massive fire, and they've worked very hard to actually restore the center of the town now. Some of the residential properties still need attention, but it's actually in a very good condition at the moment, and it's a beautiful drive to go in. It's a sand road still, but it's in very good condition from Clanwilliam, and it's the scenery going through that part of the Cederberg is just too wonderful. That's anybody enjoys the natural world, that really is a part of the world to go to.
It is absolutely spectacular. If anyone has a bit of a high clearance vehicle, riding the back roads from Wuppertal all the way down to the south of the Cederberg is an absolute must if you're a wanderer. And there are lovely places to stay over and private little spots, camping places. It is truly something to go and have a look at and get lost for at least 5 days in the Cederberg. Okay. Other places you'd like us to go and visit?
Well, as you mentioned, the coast, you mentioned Paternoster is one of the bigger towns, but one of the smaller fishing towns, of course, is Veldrift and Laaiplek, which is also very interesting history that it grew up around the fishing industry. And the museum there, the SA Fisheries Museum, actually highlights the development of the town and the area, specifically based on fishing. The Stefan brothers started it, and it's grown from there. And during the Second World War, for example, when there was a shortage of fish, they started harvesting crayfish and canning fish for the first time in the world. So it's got quite an interesting background, and the people are really friendly. A Bokkum line, which lines the lower edges of the Berg River, which has just recently been declared a Ramsar World Site for Birds.
Oh.
So you can look at the nature from Bokkum line, sitting at one of the restaurants overlooking the most magical river landscape.
And a Ramsar site is truly something spectacular. If you're a bird watcher, it is an absolute experience. A Ramsar site is quite an esteemed title to have as well. And then we're looking at places like Darling. Obviously, the Perron, Darling is a nice place for tourists to go to. And a wine farm or two. I know Grote Post makes lovely white wines at the right angle with a mist from the sea. It's also lovely places to go and visit.
Absolutely. Yeah, Grote Post is certainly one of the prominent ones, but of course there are a number of others. If you think of places like Duvenberg and Alles Verloren, they were established in the early 18th century. And Alles Verloren in particular, interesting that it received its name, that it was raided by the sun when the people were away, came back to find that everything was lost, Alles Verloren. But they make a port-style wine that's internationally renowned. They have an international market. And there are many, and we have actually... It's not quite heritage, but a newer farm called Org de Rak, which is just south of Pikkeberg. But a truly organic farm that they started in a period in beautiful old mock Cape Dutch buildings with a restaurant again overlooking a fantastic landscape. But everything is just made naturally. They don't use any artificial stimulants for their growth.
Chris, just again, if someone wants to get information, where do we go to?
Well, I can recommend my website would actually give you a start, which is www.wes-kusheritage.org.za. There it lists many of the routes and other interests in our region that you can actually find from a heritage perspective, of course.
Wes-kusheritage.org. That's a lovely site to go and look at. Thank you very much, Chris, for joining us this morning and telling us about all the lovely heritage sites. Die geskiedenis is maar altyd 'n lekker ding. Is altyd 'n mooi storie om te hoor waar alles vandaan kom. Thank you very much, Chris Murphy. Nou ja, daat jy idee. As jy nou nie weet wat om te doen in die Wes-Kus nie, dan kan ons jou wragtig nie meer help nie. Dan moet jy beter geluister het op skool ook.